You think it's just another shift. And then reality flips the map on you. There are days when everything runs smooth as butter. And then there are days when the city decides to test how much you can take before something cracks. It was a Thursday, for 8:10 p.m. Memphis, Tennessee. About 90 degrees, traffic stacking up like dominoes, and I was sitting in what I call my work armor, uniform on, seatbelt clipped, water bottle between the seats, hands on the wheel like it's part of my own body now. Then the call came through. Male, elderly, fell from a ladder while working on the roof. Unconscious. Wife on scene. Condition unknown. Nothing we hadn't heard before. But you know how it is. Behind the words, nothing new, can hide the kind of call that gets under your skin and stays there. I flipped the lights and hit the siren. My partner, Thomas, was already strapping in behind me, checking the med kit and monitor like he'd done it 1,000 times, which, to be fair, he had. We've been riding together for years. And in this job, no matter how many runs you've done, every shift teaches you the same thing. There is no such thing as routine. Elderly fall? He asked, reading the tablet. Yup. 70-something. Unconscious, fell from the roof. Probably decided he didn't need help and climbed up anyway. Guy must have thought he was in a commercial for home insurance, Thomas muttered. I gunned it toward the address, weaving through the growing line of cars. People mostly moved out of the way, but there's always a few who act like their errands are more urgent than our sirens. Come on, Prius. This ain't a suggestion. We finally cleared the worst of the mess and hit the residential street. Greenwood Avenue. Quiet suburb, neat lawns, flagpoles, and the occasional plastic flamingo still surviving the summer. The house was exactly what you'd expect. White siding, single-story, clean porch. And out front, leaned against the side, an old wooden ladder reaching up to the roof. Halfway up, a bucket of tools. On the ground, sprawled like someone pressed pause mid-move, was the man. Crumpled. Still. Next to him, pacing in bare feet, was his wife. Hair pinned up, floral bathrobe, fury in her eyes. She waved us down, not in panic, but in a way that said, finally. Took you long enough. Is he conscious? I called as I grabbed the stretcher. No? Yeah. 5 minutes ago? No. And you tell me, what 73-year-old man climbs a roof by himself in this heat? I told him Steve would come help tomorrow. But knew. Mr. Independent. She didn't even glance at her husband as she said it. Her fire was focused entirely on us. Thomas knelt down beside him. Sir? Can you hear me? What's your name? The man groaned. Charles. Walker. All right, Mr. Walker. Just stay still for me, okay? We're gonna help you. He was pale, clammy, breathing shallow. I checked his leg. It was rotated wrong, unnatural. I knew that look. Likely hip fracture. Or worse. We administered morphine. The wife watched with arms folded, muttering to herself the whole time. I told him. But he never listens. Thomas and I moved fast. Collar, backboard, straps, oxygen. He groaned again as we transferred him, but we had him secured within minutes. I caught him looking up at the sky, maybe trying to read something in the clouds. Maybe just trying to get away from the pain. We loaded him in. Thomas climbed in back. I got behind the wheel, turned the lights back on, and pulled out fast. The hospital wasn't far. St. Mary's. 6 miles. Normally a 10-minute drive. But this was 4:30 p.m. in Memphis. And traffic doesn't care about broken hips. I gritted my teeth, watching the GPS pulse red with delays. What I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was that this wasn't just about Charles. This trip was about to carry more than one life. Somewhere between a blood pressure reading and a left turn onto Jefferson, logic ends, and the city takes over. Driving an ambulance isn't about speed. It's about focus. It's about threading a 10,000-pound vehicle full of pain and hope through a city that doesn't want to make room. And when you've got a man in the back whose hip is shattered, every second matters. Thomas was in the back, keeping steady pressure on Charles's shoulder, adjusting his calling out vitals every minute or so. Blood pressure's dipping slightly. Morphine's holding. He's alert, but fading. Got it, I said, scanning the sea of brake lights ahead. The GPS glowed red. Downtown traffic was choking every artery. I swung left, trying to bypass the gridlock via Jefferson Avenue. Jefferson. If you've ever driven it during rush hour, you know, it's a bottleneck disguised as a road. 3 tight lanes boxed in by concrete walls on one side and decorative guardrails on the other. No shoulders. No room for mistakes. But it was the fastest option. Or so I thought. I toggled the siren to the most piercing tone we had, The one that sounds like the world is ending. Lights flashing, horn blaring, I weave between frustrated drivers. Most moved. Some didn't. One guy in a lifted truck actually threw me the bird as he refused to yield. Classy. Still, we were making progress. Until we weren't. We just entered the stretch of Jefferson where the lanes narrow even tighter. I was in the far left, riding close to the median. Cars were pressed to the right, giving me the lane. And then it happened. A blur from the right. A moped shot out of nowhere, slicing across traffic like a deer leaping a highway median. I barely saw it before it started sliding. Tires locked, sparks flew, plastic shattered. Then came the rider, tumbling, limp, bouncing across the asphalt, until he slammed against the concrete wall just 10 feet ahead of us. *T. I stomped the brakes, swerved as far left as I could, but there was nowhere to go. We were boxed in. The rig groaned and stopped hard. I felt everything in my body lurch forward, then back. Silence. Then the smell, burnt rubber, oil, metal. And someone groaning. Thomas threw open the back doors before I even stepped out. We both ran. The moped was a mess. Plastic fairing shredded, gas leaking. The rider lay curled at the base of the median. Helmet still on. Leather jacket torn open. His right leg was twisted sideways, foot pointing the wrong direction. Young. Maybe 17, 18. He was conscious, barely. Pulses weak. Legs broken, no doubt. Might have internal injuries, Thomas called out. A car had stopped behind us. A guy in a baseball cap jumped out, helped us lift the bike off the road and drag it to the guardrail. Meanwhile, I turned to Thomas. We calling in another unit? He glanced back at the ambulance, then at Charles, then at the kid. He didn't hesitate. No time. We take him. Copy that. We did it fast. Stabilized the kid's neck, slid him onto a spine board, wrapped the leg as best we could with a vacuum splint. He groaned, cursed, but didn't fight us. He never said his name. Helmet stayed on. Within 3 minutes, we had him inside, now laying across from Charles. One old man, groaning and pale. One teenager, bloodied and silent. I jumped back in the driver's seat. Thomas gave me the thumbs up. Doors shut. Siren screamed back to life. We were moving again. But now, it felt different. 2 patients. One with bones older than the building we were driving to. The other, young, reckless, and carrying a kind of weight that didn't come from broken bones. In the rear view, I saw them both. 2 strangers. And I remember thinking, they don't know each other. But something about this didn't feel like coincidence. Sometimes the silence inside an ambulance is louder than the sirens outside. But not this time. The rig was rolling again. Lights flashing, engine humming, wheels biting at the pavement. But inside? Inside, it was something else entirely. 2 patients. 2 stories. 1 tight metal box. Charles was groaning, his face flushed from pain. His hands gripped the stretcher rail, knuckles white under thin skin. He was sweating through his shirt. The morphine helped, but not much. It never does with pelvic fractures. Pain like that drills through meds a memory. Across from him, the younger guy was laid out flat. Still in his helmet. Still silent. His jeans had been cut away from the knee down, revealing the twisted mess of his right leg. Blood soaked the gauze Thomas had wrapped earlier, but it wasn't pulsing. No arterial hit. Small favors. Thomas moved between them like a ghost, checking vitals, adjusting straps, calling out updates in that low EMT monotone that only gets louder when you really don't want it to. Old man's pressure's holding, heart rate a little elevated. Kid's borderline hypotensive, 92/60. Pupils reactive. He's in pain but stable. Copy, I called over my shoulder. I couldn't see much from the front. Just Thomas's back. But I felt the pressure in the rig, like the air itself was heavier. Like the oxygen was getting squeezed out by something we hadn't diagnosed yet. And then the silence cracked. What the hell were you thinking? It came from Charles. I flinched. Thomas jumped. You told me you were done with that thing. Done. After what happened last time, you swore. The younger guy didn't move. Didn't answer. But his fingers curled slightly against the edge of the stretcher. Thomas leaned toward Charles. Mr. Walker, I need you to stay calm. Let's focus on breathing. We're almost there. Don't tell me to breathe. He's the one who needs to listen. Charles barked, his voice full of rage and something else. Not just anger. Fear. I slowed slightly, just enough to feel the tension crawl into my fingertips on the wheel. Charles wasn't just yelling. He was reaching. Lashing out the only way he knew how with volume. You think I didn't recognize you? Just because you've got that damn helmet on? You think I couldn't tell? I'd know your dumb posture anywhere. Still, the kid said nothing. But his chest was rising faster now. Breath by breath. Charles wasn't done. You lied to me. You looked me in the eye and said you were done with the stunts. That you'd ride the bus. That you were growing up. And now look at you. Thomas caught my eye through the mirror. His look said it all. This just got personal. Mr. Walker, please. But Charles pushed through. If I hadn't fallen off that roof, I wouldn't even be here. If I hadn't needed help, I wouldn't have been in that rig. And you picked today to play hero on two wheels. The kid finally shifted. Just a little. And then, barely audible. I'm sorry. That was it. Not much. But more than nothing. Thomas froze in place for a second. Charles didn't respond right away. He just exhaled. Long. Slow. Broken. Damn it, he muttered. Just damn it. Then he turned his head away. We drove the next few blocks in silence. Not peaceful silence, but something heavier. The kind that comes after a storm, when you realize everything's still standing, but maybe just barely. When we hit the ER lot, the bay doors were already open. A receiving team stood ready, 2 stretchers, a nurse, and a doctor scribbling on a tablet. I pulled in smooth, killed the lights, and opened the cab door. Thomas opened the back and started unstrapping the patients. The kid still hadn't removed his helmet. Charles hadn't looked back at him since that final breath. We pulled Charles out first. He winced as we slid him out. But he didn't scream. Not anymore. Next was the kid. As we rolled him past Charles on the gurney, their eyes met, just for a second. No words. No recognition spoken. But something passed between them. Like static. Like truth. And just like that, they were wheeled away in separate directions. 2 different hallways. 2 different teams. But somehow still part of the same story. I leaned against the ambulance and watched the ER doors close behind them. Well, Thomas said, adjusting his gloves. That escalated. I just nodded. Because whatever this day started as, it wasn't just a call anymore. When the adrenaline fades, all that's left is the truth. And truth tends to whisper. The automatic doors slid shut behind the 2 stretchers. Charles went left. The kid went right. 2 hallways. 2 rooms. 1 shared silence. Thomas and I stayed back in the ER entrance, letting the trauma teams do their thing. We stood under the humming fluorescence, leaning against the ambulance bay wall like 2 guys who had just come down from a storm and weren't sure how to start breathing again. He popped the top off a water bottle, handed it to me, and said, "What do you think the odds are that wasn't just coincidence?" I didn't answer, because I didn't need to. You could feel it. Not in the files. Not in the medical codes. But in the way Charles shouted without naming him. In the way the kid flinched at the sound of that voice. In the way they both went silent after. This wasn't just about broken bones. This was about something already cracked, long before asphalt and ladders came into the picture. About 20 minutes later, I was filling out the run sheet when the front doors buzzed open again. 3 people walked in, fast, focused, and wide-eyed. A woman in her 40s, sharp features, athletic build. Jeans, college sweatshirt, phone in one hand. Beside her, a man with military posture and a face carved from concrete. And trailing behind, a teenager, younger than the one we'd brought in. Maybe 13, holding a backpack like it was armor. They went straight to the front desk. "My son was brought in," the woman said. "He was in a crash. Moped. He's 17. Kevin Walker." The nurse nodded, started typing. The woman rubbed her eyes, looked over at the man. "Your dad too, remember? They said they brought him in too. He fell off a ladder." The man, Steve, I assumed, let out a breath that sounded more like a curse. "This can't be real," he muttered. "My father and my son, both in the ER, within the same hour. What are we, generational adrenaline junkies?" The younger kid piped up, "Does that mean I'm next?" Nobody laughed. The nurse gave directions. The woman and Steve moved quickly toward the back. The younger boy hesitated, then followed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Thomas and I didn't approach them. There was no need. We'd already been part of their story. We didn't need to insert ourselves again. Still, I watched. Watched the mother hold her phone tight against her chest. Watched the father march like he was on duty again. Watched the kid glance at every nurse like he was waiting for someone to say the words, "We're sorry." And I thought, this is the other side of emergency work. Not the flashing lights. Not the split-second decisions. But this. The quiet rooms. The waiting. The words no one wants to say out loud. We were just about to head out when a nurse came around the corner and said, "Hey, you two brought in Charles and the moped kid, right?" "Yeah," I said. "They asked to be put in the same room." Thomas blinked. "Wait, together?" "Yeah. Apparently, mutual request. You want to come by? Just for a sec." We followed her through the corridor. Room 203. She opened the door. 2 beds. 2 four-poles. 1 old man, 1 teenager. Charles was semi-upright, a hospital blanket over his lap, pale but alert. The kid was reclined, leg in traction, helmet finally gone. Dark hair, bruises across one cheek. They weren't talking. They didn't need to. They were just there. Together. Thomas didn't say anything. He stood near the door, arms crossed. I stayed by the sink, pretending to check a supply cart. And then Charles looked at the kid and said, voice low, "You scared the hell out of me." No anger. No fire. Just truth. The kid nodded. "I know. I thought I'd lose you before I got the chance to really talk to you again." Silence. Then the kid said, "I thought the same." That was all. That was enough. Thomas nudged me. "Let's go." I nodded. We stepped out and let the door close behind us. As we walked back to the bay, I realized my heart had slowed. My shoulders had relaxed. There was still tension, sure, but it wasn't panic. It was release. Because in this job, you don't always get resolution. You get patches. You get moments. And if you're lucky, you get to witness one that sticks. The most important moments in this job never happen with an audience. They happen quietly, when no one's watching. We had already loaded up the gear. The rig was clean, restocked, back in neutral. On paper, it was the end of the call. But not really. I was sitting on the low concrete step outside the ER bay, sipping warm water from a plastic bottle and staring out across the dimming parking lot. Thomas stood a few feet away, scrolling through his phone like he was checking emails, but I could tell he wasn't reading a thing. "That was a hell of a ride," he finally said. "Yeah," I answered. Another pause. He looked at me, then at the hospital entrance. "Think they'll be all right?" I shrugged. "Physically? Yeah. Emotionally?" I let out a slow breath. "Ask me in a year." He chuckled. Not loudly. Just enough to acknowledge the truth in that. Then he held up a small red backpack, the one we'd pulled from under the stretcher. "This slid off the kid when we loaded him in. Never opened it." "What's in it?" "Don't know. Thought about checking. But figured, some things don't belong to us." He placed it gently on the back step of the ambulance. We both sat there in silence for a while. The air had cooled a bit. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, and I could hear someone dragging a trash can to the curb. The kind of sounds that only register after your body lets go of adrenaline. And then I heard the door open. Out walked the kid. He had one crutch under his arm, the other dangling from his fingers. His right leg was in a hard cast, the hospital gown swapped out for jeans and an oversized hoodie. He didn't limp. He shuffled. Carefully. He spotted me and stopped. Not surprised. Not hesitant. Just pausing. I stayed seated. He walked over, slow, and dropped the second crutch next to me like it owed him money. "You drove?" "I did," I said. He nodded. Then, after a beat, sat down next to me. Not on the steps. On the ground. Back against the wall, arms over his knees. He didn't speak right away. Neither did I. But I could feel something settling in the air between us. Then he asked, quietly, "Did he yell the whole ride?" I laughed. "Soft. Pretty much. But only because he thought you weren't going to make it." He looked down, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know he's mad. But I think this time, I get it." "Yeah? Yeah? It's weird. I spent most of the year trying to avoid him, tuning out his lectures, rolling my eyes. But hearing him scream in that rig? That was the first time in a long time I actually heard him mean it." I nodded. He went quiet again, then looked at me, eyes serious. "Do you ever get calls like that? Where everything just lines up?" I thought about it. Every now and then. Most days it's just routine. A broken arm. A seizure. A guy who drank too much. But once in a while, I gestured toward the hospital doors. You get a call that reminds you why you do this in the first place. He sat with that, then picked up the backpack from the step, turned it over in his hands. "You didn't look in it?" "Didn't feel right." He unzipped it, reached in, pulled out a photograph, creased at the corners. He held it up to the light. It was him. Younger. Maybe 10. Standing in front of a motorcycle. Charles stood behind him, holding the handlebars, grinning wide like it was the proudest day of his life. The kid smiled, just for a second. That was his old bike. Sold it when I was 12. Said it was time to grow up. And now you're riding a moped. Trying to be just like him, I guess. He slid the photo back into the bag and zipped it closed. Tell him I'm sorry, he said. Tell him yourself. He stood up, adjusted the crutch. Thanks for the ride. Anytime. He walked off, slow, steady, and disappeared through the side doors. I stayed there for a while, listening, not to sirens, not to monitors, but to the kind of quiet that comes when something has truly shifted. 2 weeks later, I saw Charles again. I was dropping off a patient for a different call when I passed through the physical therapy wing. There he was, gray sweatpants, cane, grimace on his face. Back for more? I asked. He looked up, smiled like he hadn't smiled in years. I got more healing to do. Turns out, bones aren't the only thing that need fixing. We stood there for a moment. He came to see me, you know, he said. The boy. He apologized. I figured. And I told him. I wasn't mad. I was scared. He paused. And proud. Maybe I didn't say it then, but I said it now. I patted his shoulder. He nodded and walked off, slow and stubborn. Just like always. Back in the rig, Thomas leaned into the window. What did the old man say? I smiled. That it's never too late to say the right thing. Especially when no one's watching. Then we pulled out into traffic. No lights. No sirens. Just another day. Until the next one.